sorry about that. I have a pretty good mic.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to yet another cracking edition of the Matt Brown Show. This is the Secrets of Scale series, where we connecting you to founders who have scaled their companies to some cool levels. So with me on the line is Emmanuel Debuyck, the founder and CEO of Adwanted Group. Emmanuel, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Good to have you here, man. So why don't you're doing cool things in the media space. So I'm super excited because I'm in the media space also. Tell our audience around the world just a bit about who you are, who your customers are, the problem that you solve, and that kind of stuff. Kick us off.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Emmanuel Debuyck, coming from France. I'm 50 years old, and we are trying to make the media buying process simpler. So we have a bunch of technologies to do that. Software for media agencies and media companies, data and content. That is what we are doing.
So in a nutshell, what's the problem that you're solving for companies who are looking to buy media?
We find the process to be somehow very outdated in some cases. So whatever is not digital is still coming from prehistory. Like you need insertion orders, sometimes faxes. That's what we found. And we wanted to apply the tools that you find are digital to the traditional media. So that has been my approach.
Okay. I spent a lot of time working, I say a lot of time, a few years at least, running your strategy for the likes of, TBWA, very familiar with Omnicom, WPP Group, Ogilvy, and the ways of the ways of these big advertising companies. I'm curious to find out, are those your customers, or are they like strategic partners of yours?
No, they are definitely our customers in the three countries. So in France, US, and UK, we work for the big six, as we call them, as well as medium-sized agencies. And they represent half of our customers. The other half would be media companies in TV, radio, digital, out of home. We are very agnostic.
Right, got it. So I'm a media planner sitting in Ogilvy. My client is Ford or General Motors, say, or maybe Tesla. I have $10 million to spend on my on the Model X, for argument's sake, whatever the case is. So in that context, would I then use your tools to then get a better outcome from my media spend? Like, how do your tools actually create value for media buyers?
So one of the tools you would be using from us would be a tool called Medialand, and it's reach and frequency. So we would help you do and prepare the best possible campaign, mixing the different types of media would match with your target audience. So that is what we are doing. You would put some criteria of search, and with artificial intelligence, because that's how we get the process to work, we would provide you with different scenarios, mixing, for instance, print plus digital or a TV campaign. That is how we work. We could also provide you with a lot of data sets. So you can be much more granular than with just classical data sets. So we try to enhance the data set from the different sources we're working with.
Mm-hmm. So what I'm curious to also understand, it's like there's this role of GDPR and data now, what has been, at least certainly back when I was there, and it's a long time ago now. But there's a lot of talk around the role of data compliance. I had a CEO on the show recently, and we were talking about Philip Dutton, from a great company that's all he's doing is helping mature companies, him and his team at least, remain compliant from a data perspective. And I'm not sure what the latest state of play is when it comes to regulating or regulation of data when you're looking at scaling a brand like Tesla or Ford or whatever the case is, the new Jeep EV range or what have you. Using media buying tools. So there's obviously a list of publishers. You're a media planner looking to serve ads to a relevant audience. And in many cases, the bridge is data, right? Facebook, targeting, all this kind of stuff. So where are we at today when it comes to the use of data sets or compliant data sets in scalable advertising platforms?
Well, the important thing to know in our case is that we use anonymized data. So we work with Ipsos or Kantar or Nielsen. They provide us with data sets, but in any case, we are going to target an individual. We will work with groups of people targeting through video, but it's never personal data that we use. And bear in mind, we are coming from Europe, where GDPR was born. So literally, when we started the company, the regulation was already very hard in Europe compared to what we have here in the US.
Very, very cool. So in the context of scaling Adwanted Group, you guys have raised, I think it was around 25 million to date. Yeah, around about 25 million to date. What role has that amount of funding played in your ability to scale it strategically? Like, how have you approached scaling Adwanted Group with that type of capital? Is it about opening up new regions or territories or markets? Is it about developing more capable ad serving engines? What has your approach been to scale Adwanted Group in the context of funding?
Well, that has been critical, actually. And in fact, when I first launched Adwanted, I was trying to build a marketplace. And for any kind of marketplace, you need a critical mass of users, buyers and sellers. It was pretty complicated. The chicken and egg challenge. Buyers would say, what do you have for sale? And then the sellers would ask me, who are the buyers? And we were talking about traditional media. So that was pretty complicated. And to break that vicious circle, we started discussing with other players within the ecosystem, like a reach and frequency company. And literally, my play was to tell them, you have a tool that does the shopping list, and we have a tool where you can do the transaction. So let's find a partnership. Up to the moment, the founder of that company, who was 70 years old, told me, you know what, you should acquire us. And actually, that's the reason why we first raised money. That was to proceed the acquisition. It was very hard for me to raise money because we were not able to break to crack the code and to make it work as a platform. But then doing an acquisition was a game changer for us. We had no clients, we had no credibility, we had no revenue, and so doing a first acquisition ticked all these boxes. Suddenly, you're someone, because we have acquired a company that had been running for 25 years. So the credibility was there. This company had 95% market share on the French market among media agencies. So obviously, to speak with the publishers, that was much easier because I was representing buyers. And so that's how I used the money. And soon after, I realized that was probably the fastest way to grow the company. And actually, during the last 7 years, we made 7 acquisitions, nearly one every year. Actually, we did 2 every year during the pandemic, and the first one was like 5 years ago.
It's very interesting. I mean, it's come up twice in the last 2 days for some reason. Where like I had Devin Johnson on the show yesterday, and he was talking about also, growing through acquisition, and he's like, as a strategy for scale, it's a really, really powerful idea, right? In that you're going to go to a fund like Swen Capital Partners, for instance, and you said, listen, I know you guys have got this fund, you have to spend the money. I'm going to give you an easy way to drop, big chunks of that on profitable companies. And then as a consequence of that strategic partnership with them, you're actually, able to scale yourself.
Absolutely. And that's how I grew the company from a small startup in Paris to an international group with subsidiaries in US, UK, and with 160 employees now. So the acquisition made it all. And the reach is better. Obviously, the growth is not exponential because we have acquired mature companies, but you have an existing base of clients. And so to build something stronger was somehow easier rather than starting from scratch and trying to get every client at a time.
And the other point is you don't usually see that in an early stage company.
Absolutely. And it's funny because I was I was literally in the verge of bankrupting after 3 years. We didn't make any money, and I had spent all the friends and family money. I couldn't raise any money. And then I went to the banks with this project of the first acquisition. The outcome was completely different because they knew we were acquiring something that was doing the revenue. And in fact, they kept the company as a collateral to fund it. And so that was fine for them. The risk was really mitigated. And we built from that because the additional revenue we got from that company was also a fundraiser for us. And it only amplified over the years.
So how do you approach acquiring a company? Let's just say I've got my own media company. It's definitely not for sale, but let's just say that it was. What goes through your mind strategically around this particular type of scale strategy in the sense of selecting a potential acquirer or not? Because oftentimes, you also can't make mistakes. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, we do.
Are you in the acquisition space? Really? Jeez.
Yeah, we did. We went bankrupt for one of the companies we have acquired because there is some kind of recipe for success, and the recipe is obviously to find the right fit between the companies and the product, but there's also a very important need for a fit between people. And you don't always see that during due diligence. In fact, the path we took was always the same. We meet companies, tell them we would love to make a partnership with them, with absolutely no intention to acquire them. But it becomes obvious after a few months that this partnership would be much more valuable if we could go for an acquisition. And then you start talking with the CEO of a company you've never met before. You start establishing good relationships until we agree on the fact that maybe we should go for an acquisition. But that doesn't make you know anyone within the company. And so the day of the acquisition, you start being in touch with a lot of people, managers, execs, and sometimes you realize that they are just terrible because in one case, we had the CEO of the company who was brilliant, but the team behind him, they were really terrible. So the day he decided to move, then we were just left with the execs. And they were just terrible because of him. He was doing too much things, but they never tried to improve themselves and to get more skills. So when the pandemic arrived, the company just bust, and we had to bankrupt that. So lesson learned. There is a lot of things related to HR when we do that. It's also cultural. We have been in face of many different situations. First, because we were a young startup and we acquired companies that were 25 years old, 40 years old, and actually the US company we have acquired was 104 years old. So the culture between two companies from a startup to a 104 years old company is absolutely different. Not mentioning the language, as you may hear. I don't have exactly the same language. And so for that reason, that makes the recipe being even more complicated. But it's very, actually, I'm passionate about that. I learn a lot, but I know that we always face challenges.
So help our audience understand you potentially haven't acquired 7 companies in the last few years, or maybe a few more like Devin has from Connected. But are you creating a group structure where the group owns preferred stock in all the subsidiaries, and is it really a case of going to your investors and saying, look, you're going to own a percentage of this group company, and the services or the propositions of the products and services of the subsidiaries are complementary in nature, so together we become a more stronger value proposition, but from an investor perspective, you guys are getting a bigger piece of a bigger pie.
Yeah, well, the recipe is this one is for sure. We don't go for an acquisition if it doesn't create values for the initial investors, because now we started with one company that became a group, and the group is a holding company holding all these subsidiaries. And by the way, the business we started with, the marketplace that I wanted to create, never made it. So I had to stop that. And we only kept all the companies we have acquired, which offered very interesting potential. And so, the return for the investors is to make something seamless, obvious, that complementarities are created. Like, for instance, at that very moment, I have businesses in France, in UK, and the US. They are all leading their markets with between 80 and 95% of their markets, but they have never exported. So the technologies we have in UK, I'm trying to build that in the US. And so that's how we create value, because this company that is doing really well in UK, now if it starts exporting in US, that becomes a much bigger marketplace. And obviously for the investors, the outcome is going to be fantastic. Well, that's the goal.
Mm. Yeah, it's fascinating. You mentioned making mistakes in the space. Because I haven't gone and executed on the strategies. I'm coming in really cold. But I would be fearful if I was sitting on a fund of say 50 million or access to funds to go and acquire companies to help me scale. Like I would be nervous, about ruining related. Like because you're not necessarily financially capable enough if you don't really know the space. Like I'm learning, doing my securities exams here in the US at the moment, and let me tell you, everybody. It's a whole different world out there, and so I have sold companies, but acquisition, you kind of get some principles, just enough to be dangerous. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But you don't know it all.
It's a learning curve. I did a first acquisition, so I did know nothing about acquisition at first. So we went for a small deal. It was pretty cool, but I had no money. My company was making losses, and we make an acquisition. The combination of the two companies was still making losses. So you need to prove the investor that the acquisition is transforming. And then you try to transform the acquired company, make more profits. And then you go to your bank saying, you see, we made that acquisition, and 18 months later, the company is doing twice as much as what it was doing. So now we want to go for a bigger acquisition, and they would lend you more money. So that's how we started with a small acquisition, probably around 1 million. And the last one was 12 million. So each time we are growing and going for a bigger acquisition, knowing the fact that for me, I spend as much time on a deal which is 1 million than a one for 12 million. So now as we grow, we tend to go for bigger and bigger companies. But I couldn't have started immediately with the big one, because then maybe that's where we would have made a mistake and have to bankrupt the company. So it was good to kind of try and learn on smaller targets and then expand and grow. And by the way, gain credibility among the investors. It took us 5 acquisitions to be a profitable group, because the initial company was making so much losses trying to build a tech that was never working, that I was trying to go for the next acquisition to make more profit and compensate. It took us 5 acquisitions to get there. And now we are building, because we are self-sustainable, profitable, and with a positive cash flow, which is pretty new. Just been 2 years we've reached that.
I'm going to come back to that, but we've got to take a quick break. The Matt Brown Show is presented by Carafin, an investment bank that offers and supports direct private investments in U.S. operating companies. Over the past 20 years, investors have placed over $1.2 billion of private debt and equity in more than 100 companies through Carafin and its affiliates. Carafin leverages technology to empower its community of investors to deploy their capital far more efficiently than ever before, and connects their community of engaged investors with worthy companies. Invest portions of your portfolio in direct private investments today. Visit carafin.com/Matt Brown Show for more. And we're back. So just to circle back to that point you made, where you acquire a company and then it's like losing, and or the thing goes bankrupt. So you've been in the space where businesses have died in your experience, like you've been involved with it in some way, shape, or form. So have I. I've founded 14 startups over 25 years, had a couple of exits, but had a lot of businesses where the wheels came off in a complete car crash. And I have my perspective on it, and we would love to get yours. How do you manage that? Because I've found that how do you manage the feeling of losing a business, dying, or having a business die under your watch? Because I found that my personal experience has been like ambition's a double-edged sword. Like it's all nice to talk about it's a secret to scale, you're raising 25 million, whatever the case might be, or 50 million, 70 million, 100 million, some of the guys have done on the show, because you have this ambition, you know what I mean, to scale. And it's a similar sort of principle, different context for you, of course, but the principle is the same, meaning you have this ambition, you do this thing, and it doesn't work. And so you're sitting with a failed business. What has your experience been around managing emotions when, in the pursuit of scale, things don't work out?
Very interesting points. So when that company we acquired bankrupt, I had absolutely no emotion. I was cold-blooded and decided to close the company because of my experience. Actually, I started my first company when I was 23. That was an advertising agency. I built it up all by myself. And after 17 years, it went bankrupt. And I lost everything. I lost, by the way, my marriage. I lost my house. I lost everything. So that was a very interesting lesson for me. So when 10 years later, among our group, one of the subsidiaries is not working well, I just didn't want to wait because I still had 6 companies that were working well and one who was in difficult period. And that's when, because of that previous experience, I was like, it is a no-brainer. We have to stop that immediately. Otherwise, it's going to affect all the other businesses within the group. And that would be a nightmare. So we took the decision within just a few months, saying it's not going to be better. That was the beginning of the pandemic. And we saw that the influx of clients just disappeared over a few weeks. And I was like, we cannot support the funding of that, so we better stop immediately. And that was and actually our banks and partners liked that because we told them, we are going to bankrupt the company. That company doesn't have that much debt, so we are not having any issues with the vendors or partners, but it is important for us to stop that immediately to save the rest of the business and to grow it. So they appreciated our transparency there. And so, you need to remain completely cold-blooded, even if you have to let people go. But at some point, it was stopping that small company or jeopardizing everything else.
Yeah, it's. I think, but your first one wasn't like that. Like if you're losing the shirt off your back and you're losing your marriage and you're basically losing your sense of self and your self-esteem and your self-confidence.
Yeah.
Like the first one.
Because
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, because I waited probably too long for the first one, so I didn't want to admit the difficulties I was facing. And so I was the sole owner of the company. I brought another investor in the company who was in a really bad shape. I didn't know that, and actually precipitated the bankruptcy of the first company. So it really, I learned as much as I could from that first bankruptcy. And when you bankrupt after 17 years, it's not the same as if you start your company and it fails fast. Well, maybe that was not a good market fit there. It was terrible because I was building, the company was growing. I mean, we had a nice and decent sized team, like 50 people. And then suddenly, overnight, you have to just stop because you don't have any cash to continue. That was something very important for me when I started the new company. I had that experience of some kind of failure. And by the way, that's one of the reasons why I moved to the US, because in France, this is absolutely not accepted. It is not acceptable to bankrupt a company. I was like a thief, or I was like, I don't know what. And then I came to the US for some kind of training. And I was explaining my experience to some investor and told the guy I had to bankrupt my previous company. And the guy literally stopped me as I was talking and he said, you have one more degree than others because of that. Meaning you either succeed or you learn. When in France, it's like I had a red mark. Even after 17 years, you were a loser. And no one would help me for the new company. So I still started the company in France, but as soon as I could, I moved to the US. And actually the mindset of the US was exactly what I needed.
Yeah. So I had a group of, so I had a group structure. I wasn't acquiring companies, but we were developing technology platforms to complement service, various things. And then when I moved to the States, I handed it over to a management team. I'm like, yo, here's the keys to the car. Don't crash the freaking thing, But it was my wife and myself out the business. Fast forward 6 months, it was a case of like, well, we're not putting any more money into it. We were losing clients, and it was just like, no. So I killed it. And in South Africa, it's the same culture as France, from what I'm hearing anyway, in the sense of like you get penalized for it. So It's kind of like, your business dies, and then you're not allowed to run another business for 10 years, or something like that. And it's like, and it's ridiculous. So I was speaking to a venture capital guy here a couple of weeks ago, Brandon, and he was talking. I said, look, I'm getting into this financing space, investing space for startups and high growth companies, what have you, and explain to me from a venture capital perspective what you feel are my options. And so one of the options was, well, you raise a fund, kind of like what venture capital firms do. You raise a fund, you shove it into an SPV, you make 10 investments. That SPV or special purpose vehicle, it owns these 10 companies, and you take 2% of the fund. There's some carry, DPI off the back of that, what have you. And I said to him, yeah, but hold on a second. What happens in America if, let's just say you raise 10 million for the purposes of discussion, and there's zero ROI and you raise $1 million from 10 investors? What happens then? He goes, nothing.
Yeah.
And like this, and I'm like, what? How do you get to do that and get, like, there's no recourse? Well, there is recourse, of course. Obviously, there's other things that go down in any failed business relationship. But let's just say it happened today, like the next day, you could do it again,
Yeah, with the experience. And that even makes a difference in the US when it's a red mark in France or South Africa. That would be seen as, like a degree. That's exactly what the guy told me. Because of that experience, that you don't want to fail anymore. And by the way, you didn't fail, you just left. In fact, unless there was a fraud, there is no consequence.
Yeah, that's different for sure. Like to your point, though, I was speaking to Steve Blank when I first interviewed him. He's been on my show a few times. But he said to me, you know what, in Silicon Valley, Matt, we've got a term here in Silicon Valley for an entrepreneur that's failed, or that has, started a startup and then failed. And he goes, you know what that word is, Matt? And I'm like, what's that? He goes, experienced.
Yeah, I like that approach. Yeah. The US mindset really helped me in that field. It took me nearly 4 years to have the first dollar of revenue. So I had some investors asking me, why the hell are you staying in the US where the cost of living is so important, rather than staying with your group in Paris? Well, that was just the mindset, because every time I was meeting bankers in France, they would remind me of the bankruptcy like 5 years previously, or 6 or 7. It's like it's never raised. Here in the US, I was completely virgin, but people always give you some chance. So I was both far from the issues I had in France, and the mindset made me make all these acquisitions from here in the US, even some acquisitions in France, even with funders in France. But I was able, because of the mindset, to get rid of all these kind of bad moods, or the evil look that you sometimes have from people because you bankrupt a company.
Yeah. So I want to circle back to your investment raise because I think it was Sven. I had it up on my screen here a moment ago. I think it was Sven Capital Partners or something like that. Anyway, so they're based out in France. So it hasn't come up on the show before. Like, lots of capital raising conversations happen on this show about America. What happens? How would you characterize the fundraising challenges of a European-based startup versus, say, what your more recent experience is here in the US?
Well, first, I'm here in the US. I'm still looked at as a European company. And so we have that means we have never been able to raise money in the US, because today we are running $20 million of revenue globally, and 30% of that in the US, meaning 70% of the revenue comes from Europe. The headquarters of the company is in Paris. So for US investors, it's like, well, you're not really here and we're not going to invest in you. So actually what I'm preparing at the very moment is to go for the next acquisition, which is going to be in the US, where I think I will raise money and where the valuation will be much bigger than if I were to do exactly the same from France. So even if now I'm a US resident with a green card, yeah, the business is still too small to make the interest. Interestingly, the fact I am in the US was something very good for European investors because they know how hard it is for a company from outside the US to get into the US market. So actually, that was pretty good. And so most of the money we raised is coming from, and that was through debt and that was through equity. Out of 25 million, half of that was coming through equity. So we had investors, and the last round was only through debt, mezzanine debt. And that's when Swen Capital and Arbevel went in.
It's interesting that, that idea of investors knowing intimately, well, they just know that it's hard for a European-based startup to expand to the US. Not in all cases, but in most cases. Has that been your experience, though? I mean, if you're the guy doing it, has it been in the context of scaling Adwanted Group? Has it really been at a really acute level of difficulty to expand here?
Absolutely. So when I started the company, I first hired someone here in the US to develop the marketplace I was trying to launch. And I soon realized that the cost was absolutely immense. Like recruiting a salesperson in the US is probably 3 times as much as what it costs in Paris. And so it was nearly impossible to kind of bootstrap in the US. You needed a lot of funds. And I soon realized it would be easier to raise money to make an acquisition rather than raising the same amount of money and trying to launch myself from scratch. So, and actually that is exactly that strategy that blows investors' mind in Europe, because it's kind of like, oh, you crack the code to penetrate the US market. I said, yes, through an acquisition, rather than trying to recruit someone. But it comes from the cost of hiring people in the US, the cultural difference, very hard to manage US people when you're not born in the US, because, you know, the way they were educated, trained, their skills are very different to what you get from your own country. So acquiring a company that is already established in the US removed all these issues.
Yeah, it's something that I think founders who build companies to scale and then exit from, I think what they sometimes do mistakenly is they go, well, I'm going to start another company. It's like, no. That's probably the harder way to do it. And you know, like even if you hit success today, let's just say today's startup, and you sell it, the next one doesn't mean you're going to be successful. So in theory, you could lose all your liquidity in this next venture, right? Because again, it's a very unpredictable, uncertain journey that we're all on, right? As founders, entrepreneurs, and so forth. And
that's, by the way, a very important point. I have a lot of friends who have tried to launch their business in the US, and they would stay especially in France, sending someone. That doesn't work either. You need to be one of the founders. You need to have some skin in the game in the US. So if you send your sales manager in the US, that's the best recipe for failure. So that's why it's difficult, because if you have a very good idea and you launch your business outside of the US and you send someone, it doesn't work as well as if you are there and you represent your companies, so people know that they can trust you and help you build, by the way. But if you don't get there, it's very, very hard. So that means when I moved to the US, I also to rethink all my management in France, because then I was not there to build the team and grow it. And that's, I think that is exactly what the investor like. The fact that we were able to manage these two things in the same time, penetrating the US market as well as keeping the business running in France and growing, being away.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And go back to this idea of like, what do you do? I think there's you're doing this scaled through acquisition story. I think if you do sell, like I'm going to ask you just now around like how much scale is enough for you? What do you want to do with this thing? But let's just say like if you did sell it at Adwanted Group and then you founded another company, like if you look back at even your own story, right, that's littered with things that didn't work out the way that you expected to. But if you were sitting on like $1 million or $10 million or $5 million or whatever, you could buy a company with customers, with products or services, with EBITDA, right? And you take all the risk out of it. You know what I mean? Like you don't have to start from day one with no customers, no brand, no nothing. You know what I'm saying? Like you're buying an actual asset. And if you know how to scale a company, then you can scale this thing. I'm now CEO, I'm the owner, and I might put in a small team of people that I trust, and together you give them some minority shares, and then you go and scale this thing because you can bring your previous skill set and experience, where it keeps coming up, to the table, right? So you take all the risk out and you get to scale it again.
Yeah, and you bring also your fresh eyes on the business that has been running. So it's really is a virtuous circle because you bring a lot of skills, new ideas. You help a team renew themselves because they were so much doing the same thing for years. Sometimes just bringing some fresh air is also a good opportunity to grow the company even faster.
Yeah, and on that bombshell, we're going to take a quick break. Raising money for your startup? Well, why don't you close your next funding round fast? Get investor-focused media and FaceTime with relevant investors in days. Visit showworksmedia.com for more. That's showworks with an X, media.com. Right, guys, and we're back. So let's talk about scale and how much is enough. Like this story of you acquiring companies, which I love, and where does it get to a point where you're like, you know what? We're good. We've reached a size where we're hitting certain revenue numbers that are enough. Is there a level or a stage that is enough for you in terms of scale?
Yes, for sure, and that is called ambition. So I've reached a stage right now where the company has grown sufficiently to be cash flow positive. So I could just stop doing the acquisition, just knowing that in 5 years from now, I would have to reimburse the investors that came for the debt. But literally, I could remain just the same. And then, because people ask me often, when do you plan to stop? I say, well, when I have more challenges than pleasures, literally. And so, as long as I like what I do and it still grows, I'm very fine going on the same path and try to grow the company even bigger. But literally, I could stop tomorrow. I would really get bored because also part of my strategy, doing some acquisition, I'm not operational anymore. So I was talking with one of my friends recently, and they would ask me what kind of clients we have. I don't know personally any of my clients because the group is a buildup of companies that have been with their clients for 10 years, for decades. So I don't know the client. My own role is to manage the CEOs of these companies I have acquired. I am their coach. So if we were to stop now the acquisition process, I wouldn't have much things to do. I could just go fishing, which I don't like at all. So for my own motivation, I like to see the big picture and try to envision how possible that is. Because of course, each acquisition means either going for debt or equity. That means dilution. And of course, at some point, losing the control of the company. And I've been my boss since I started working. So I don't know what it is to work for someone else. So that would be probably my limit. That's when I would stop saying, wow, if I just have a few percentage points of my company, even if it's a massive cake, but I don't have the control, I might not feel as good as that. So that could be the case, but I've not reached that stage yet.
Well, you will.
Yeah, I know that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
That's funny. So
I made sure during the last race that I was granted triple voting rights. So even losing the majority of shares, I could still keep the control of the company and make the decisions.
Yeah.
But yeah, that has an end also. I know that.
What are you struggling with right now when it comes to scale? Is it still finding more acquisitions in the US, or is there something else that comes to mind? Like what, when you're staring at the ceiling and you can't sleep, like what's that thing?
It's really about funding versus value. Because right now, if I raise 20 million, for instance, which is my next stage, trying to raise between 20 and 30 million to acquire a company that has exactly the same value, I would just get diluted. But that doesn't bring value to the group. So the goal is to find a company where you think you can do better and then have a decent multiple and raise at a much higher multiple. And the difference is the value you're getting out of that, unless you want to wait 5 years for the synergies to upgrade. But I need to make it in a short period of time. So that's the issue. Um, for instance, I know the valuation of the companies is much higher in the US compared to Europe. So I'd rather raise in the US. But if I acquire a company in the US, the valuation of that company is going to be higher as well. So it's about finding the right momentum. Like right now, I'm contacted by a lot of investors because they have a lot of money in digital operations or in cryptos, and they're looking for software companies like we are right now. So we don't have like 25% growth, but we are very stable. Recurring revenue is probably 97% of our revenue. So very reassuring, but they will never make times five with us in a short period of time. So it's always trying to find the right moment to do that.
Got you. So I want to have a quick bit of fun with you for a moment. So I want to give you the keys to the Matt Brown Show time machine. And if you could go back to yourself on day one of Adwanted Group, like, no acquisitions, no nothing, what advice would you give yourself about scaling Adwanted Group?
Don't listen to those who say this is impossible. So that would be the first thing. And especially when we were approaching the moment where the company was cashless and I couldn't raise funds on the initial project, when I started envisioning with some people that I should go for an acquisition, probably 90% of the people I was talking with would tell me this is never going to happen. And actually it did. And because I believed in myself, I was in touch with the CEO of the company I wanted to acquire. He knew we didn't have much money, so he was kind of flexible on the payment terms. And actually, I was the only possible buyer of his company. So he realized that he should help me because that's how he could make money. And that's exactly how it happened. But on the paper, that was absolutely impossible. I had no money. So how do you acquire a company with no money? Well, that's when the personality comes into play. This is CEO to CEO. And to tell you the truth, 3 days before the deal, I was in touch with the bank that was supposed to fund the deal. And the bank told me, I'm sorry, but we are not following you. So we're not going to lend you any money. So I'm calling the seller of the company saying, I'm terribly sorry. We've been talking for 6 months to acquire the company. I had a deal with actually your bank, but they just changed their mind. So we cannot do that deal. And the guy told me, because we had been discussing for 6 months, let me come back to you with a solution. And he literally told me, you can pay me over 5 years. And I paid him with the money that we were generating from his own company that we just multiplied because we made some smart moves. The company was much more profitable than we expected. And the guy was very happy because he had an earn-out. So at the end of the day, he made more money trusting me than if we had funded the deal with the bank.
Very interesting story, man. Well, look, thank you so much for being on the show, Emmanuel. It's been a real privilege having you here, buddy. I think you're doing cool things. It's different, man. And I'm all about the difference. I think the different things are the things that are the most valuable. So thanks for being on the show, man. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me. That was a pleasure.
Anytime. Cheers, guys.